Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Council of Juvenile Correctional Administrators Positive Youth Development Committee's Education Webinar Series. This is our third in a series of webinars this year focused on education and the juvenile justice system. Today's webinar focuses on youth engagement strategies in the classroom and facility. I want to thank you all for taking the time to participate in this webinar series, and to give a special thanks to today's presenters, as well as to Peter Forbes, Commissioner of the Massachusetts DYS, Phil Harris from Temple University, and Simone Gonsolin from the American Institute of Research, who have all put a lot of work into preparing for these webinars. We all appreciate their work very much. For those of you who might be new to CJCA, CJCA is a national nonprofit organization formed in 1994 to improve juvenile justice systems, local secure correctional and residential facilities, services, programs, and most importantly, long-term outcomes for youth and their families. CJCA represents the youth juvenile justice system CEOs in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and various major metropolitan counties across the country. So thanks again for joining us on the webinar, and I'm going to turn it over to Jonah, who will now provide with some housekeeping.
Thank you, Mike. I'm here in the CJCA office along with Darlene Conroy. Quickly before we get started, some housekeeping. All attendees are muted for this call, but you can type questions anytime using the GoToWebinar control panel. There will be a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We'll get to all your questions then. And this webinar is being recorded, so a link to the audio recording and a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation will be sent out following the close of the webinar. Now I'll turn it over to Peter Forbes for our introductions.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter Forbes. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Youth Services here in Massachusetts, and I'm the chair of the Positive Youth Outcome Committee for CJCA. Mike recognized Phil, Simone, and Michelle Phillips, who are an ad hoc planning committee that have been supporting the educational webinar series. I also want to give Mike and his team at CJCA a shout out for their support of the webinar series. We titled this particular webinar Youth Engagement Strategies to basically signal that it's something that we do with youth, and we moved away from behavior management as a title as something that you do to youth. So I just wanted to point that out, and I want to special thanks to our presenters, Christine Jolivet, PhD, Paul Bryant and Mary Harmon Bryant, Endowed Professor, Special Education and Multiple Abilities, University of Alabama. Christine Doyle, PhD, Director, Office of Behavioral Health, the Georgia Department of Juvenile Justice. Daniel Sovereign, Education Supervisor at the Midgeville Youth Development Center. So I want to thank our colleagues for joining this call, and I want to turn it over to Christine to lead the conversation.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm tasked with a brief overview of a multi-tiered system of support named Facility-Wide Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. I just lost my screen. So if someone will advance it for me, that would be really good. Sorry about that, guys. I got it back. One of the things that we're going to talk about in the brief time that I have with you is to talk about a multi-tiered system of support, some of the features of implementation that can occur within your juvenile facility, as well as some of the benefits that we have seen from this implementation. If someone could click my slide, please. Thanks, and again. Thank you. One of the things that we see a lot in juvenile facilities is that we know that things just don't occur. We have lots of accrediting bodies and a lot of entities that are providing guidelines so that we can improve the services to the youth that we are charged with serving. A few years ago, the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education did come out with some guidelines to promote more proactive and preventative evidence evidence-based programming for youth within juvenile corrections. These guidelines really focus on making sure that the environments in which we work are safe and secure, as well as those that support staff in implementing a wide variety of programming. And when we think of programming and curriculum, those are synonyms with education, treatment, and so forth, as well as making sure that the staff that we have, we can retain within the field because we're providing them the skill sets they need to work with youth in terms of improving and sustaining their improved behaviors. Please click. Within a multi-tiered system of support, there are 3 tiers. I'm sure you guys have seen this triangle quite a bit. It is taken from the public health model. Within Tier 1, please click. We are looking at preventing harm and addressing the needs of 80 to 85% of youth within the facility. This is universal precautions, and these are going to be services, programming, and treatment that are provided to any youth who is under your care. Please click. Within that, we know that some of our youth, that's not going to be successful, and what we want to do is reverse the harm related to their behaviors and their deficits and excesses in other areas. With that, we provide Tier 2 supports. Those who need have more frequent behavioral problems and mental health needs typically do need Tier 3 supports where we're reducing harm. Within this model, it's a push-down model, so being at the tippy top is not the best place for one to be because that means that you need a lot more services than your peers who are being afforded services at Tier 1. If a youth is identified as needing Tier 1 services and that's not successful, we then add Tier 2 services, and if that's not successful, we then add Tier 3 services. That message being within a multi-tiered system of support is that if you're receiving Tier 2 services, it means you are receiving Tier 1 services as well. We do not take those away. Please click. Please click. Within this, we need to understand what the definition is of facility-wide PBIS, so facility-wide positive behavioral interventions and supports, which is a 3-tiered model, is that this is where residential programs such as secure and non-secure juvenile facilities, therapeutic group homes, therapeutic hospitals, and those types of settings where you provide 24/7 direct care. It means that all the youth and staff have gotten together to build their expectations, to know what is expected of the youth, how we're going to support them, what we'll do to address problem behaviors, as well as reinforce them for engaging in those newly acquired behaviors. One of the things with facility-wide PBIS is that no adult can escape implementation. Any adult who walks in does need to implement the facility-wide PBIS plan as well as the other practices that have been charged to them. Please click. Within this, the PBIS framework is a framework. So Christy, Danny, and I have nothing to sell you. This is a framework to organize the services that staff provide to the youth in their care, whether you're a detention facility or a long-term facility. This gets everyone on the same page. Often we hear from staff within facilities when you have to work across those disciplines is that, hey, this isn't my job to address behavior, or I wasn't hired to do this. It does not matter. Anyone who works within that facility is to implement the facility-wide PBIS plan that's been created by an interdisciplinary team of frontline workers across the disciplines and in tandem with the youth as well. With that, we also know that sometimes people receive their paychecks from different entities and not the state juvenile justice facility or the private contractor. Again, that does not matter. Any adult who's working in these settings should implement the plan as written. What this plan does is it provides consistent language, core expectations, a focus on prevention instead of being reactive and punitive, and it's also agreeing to address problem behaviors in the same way. That way staff feel like others have their back, that when a problem situation does arise, that everyone is on the same page. Please click. Within this framework, we do want to clarify one term. So I've mentioned facility-wide PBIS, which is facility-wide positive behavioral interventions and supports, which is an example of a multi-tiered system. A lot of times in juvenile facilities, a lot of you might be using the PBS or performance-based standards assessment tools. Those are two separate things. However, you can certainly use the PBIS or performance-based standards data and the reporting mechanisms, the figures and charts that are produced, and the comparisons to your progress over time as a data source within the PBIS framework. And we're seeing many juvenile facilities who have implemented the PBIS framework in tandem with the data collection with their PBS. That is something that if you are using PBS and you're going to adopt and implement the PBIS framework, to just make clear with your staff that those are two separate things. Please click. Click. So some of the features of implementation for facility-wide PBIS so that we can address youth engagement is that we need to have systems, data, and practices in place to realize the outcomes that we have set as a facility, as an agency, as well as individually for youth and staff. System supports just means that we have systems in place that support the behaviors of the staff who are working with the youth. That is, do we provide them with professional development? Are the teaming structures in place for them to make decisions and look at data? Is there a communication plan to address training of staff and so forth? Data supports is data. We collect a lot of data in the juvenile system, but what we found when the PBIS framework is implemented, that a lot of times the teams and even administrators within the facility do not have the large picture of what's going on in their facility. We've worked with a lot of IT folks within agencies who have been able to make sense of the behavioral matrix behind all the data that's being entered so that we have real-time data to make data-based decisions. And practice supports are synonymous with any type of intervention, strategy, method, curriculum, or programming that you have in place to address the whole youth, not just the behavior of the youth. Please click. Within this and across the tiers, everything that we do is teaching and modeling what we want the youth to do, whether that's behaviorally, academically, socially, and so forth, that we reinforce and recognize the change in their behavior and their attempts to improve their behavior, their academics, and so forth. But we also reinforce the staff who are implementing the facility-wide PBIS plan. That addresses fidelity of implementation issues as well as increases staff buy-in to implement the procedures and so forth. Data-based decision making. Everything we do should be predicated on data and moving away from that reactionary in the moment, who was the naughtiest last night mentality in terms of divvying up what services that they need to be successful with you. Please advance. Within this is an example of Tier 1 logic within the framework. You'll see teach, model, reinforce, and data-based decision on the left. So what Danny's going to talk about is related to some of their Tier 1 supports. So to do that, you create 3 to 5 positively stated behavioral expectations. Those are what do you want the youth to do. So often when we go in facilities, we see lots of signage with all the no's, don'ts, stops, and quits. But when a youth is problem solving and maybe highly emotional, if that's the only thing they see on the wall, then more likely we're going to see those behaviors come back at us. So what is it that we want to see? We create a matrix for all the facility environments, and when I mean all, it's all. So every bathroom, every hallway, every room, the common space, private space, anywhere in the facility where youth may be would be saturated with your behavioral expectations. Then we create the resource guides or protocols, and that's how do we actually teach and model these expectations that we've created. That is an opportunity to share that task across staff. The more they teach it, the more they learn it themselves. The reinforcement system, so what are we going to do when youth are engaged in those behaviors? And what are we going to do to recognize staff who are implementing the facility-wide PBIS plan? And then the different data sources that you're going to measure to see if your plan was effective. Please advance. This is a fictitious example of the, a facility-wide PBIS plan for a juvenile facility. In the green is Tier 1 practices, those strategies and so forth to address the needs of the youth. The yellow is Tier 2 practices, and the red are Tier 3 practices. One of the things you'll see in Tier 1 is the facility-wide PBIS plan, which is the focus of today, as well as some of the other programming that they provide to all youth versus some youth versus to a few youth. Please advance. Within this, what we're trying to say is that we all need to be on the same page. So we have common expectations, common policies and procedures, and common reinforcements to really address the full youth instead of just looking at a youth in terms of mental health only, education only, vocation only, and so forth. Please advance. Please advance. Please advance. So some of the reported benefits of facility-wide PBIS implementation is that we are seeing increased programming engagement by youth. When I say engagement, I'm not just saying that the kid is showing up to education or showing up for group therapy or showing up for milieu. They are also, please advance, they're also actively participating in whatever those activities and discussions are for that particular time slot. They're also moving through their programming in a more efficient speed and to higher levels in terms of accuracy. So when we see engagement, we've had a lot of agency personnel as well as facility personnel say that facility-wide PBIS implementation, when done with Fidelity, has really changed the culture and climate of their entire facility, as well as all of those different environments within the facility and the activities that are performed. Please advance. Other benefits that we're seeing, go ahead and click, is that we're seeing improved relations between staff and youth. That's really important when we need youth and staff to problem solve during troubled times. We are also seeing a decrease in overall behavioral incidents. So you think, well, how come if engagement is up, wouldn't behavioral incidents go down? Well, not necessarily. But what we're seeing in particular is youth on staff, self-harm, and medication noncompliance has all improved. Please advance. We've also seen that the use of restraint has decreased, and that does make sense. If we're seeing improved engagement, then we're less likely to see inappropriate behaviors where the practice such as restraint and seclusion would need to be used. Please advance. We're also seeing that the youth and staff are saying that they see utility of the facility-wide PBIS and the features of implementation as something useful that they could use outside the facility, which is a really nice thing. Please advance. Some of the other benefits is that we're hearing about improved staff efficacy. So we have youth staff who are coming to work, ready to implement programming as prescribed. They're showing up, they're learning how to problem solve when issues arise. And we've seen in a lot of facilities, staff retention has actually improved. Please advance. Please advance. So some of the resources, I know that was really quick. Attached to this webinar are several resources that you can use and download. Two important places where you're going to find a lot of facility-wide PBIS resources. One is on the National Technical Center for Positive Behavioral Support. This front page of the document is one of your handouts. It is a searchable tool. We've compiled all of the manuscripts, webinars, presentations, tools, and so forth specific to facility-wide PBIS in one place that you can click and go directly to those sources. We're also using a lot of resources from NDTAC. Those are 3 of your 4 handouts because they have great resources and they are searchable as well in terms of having a lot of resources related to this topic. Please click. And so I know that was fast, and I'll turn it over to Christy so you can get a lot more details of what facility-wide PBIS actually looks like from an agency perspective, and then Danny will talk about it at the facility level.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I will be talking about how we in Georgia made the decision to implement facility-wide PBIS and then how we carried through on that implementation from an agency-wide level. So the first big question is why? You know, as Peter pointed out at the beginning of the webinar, we have really moved away from behavior management that we do to kids and systems in which we engage with kids. And that was our task at hand at the time back in 2012. We knew that the behavior management system that we were using at the time was broken. It was a token economy system that encouraged gambling, food hoarding. Fights would often break out over gambling debts or hoarded food. It just wasn't working for the youth or the staff. In addition, we knew we needed some catalysts to help drive a change to the climate and culture of our facilities from a more negative, compliance-based system to a rehabilitative type of setting in which the kids could attain skills that they could carry back to the communities with them to help them be successful once they re-entered society. We also, at the same time these decisions were being made, had legislative action going on in the Georgia legislature that culminated in the passage of a bill in 2013 that went live on January 1, 2014, that mandated the use of evidence-based practices in DJJ. So it was really a confluence of happy events that all came together and made PBIS a very attractive system at the time. So why PBIS specifically? We knew we needed something different. Why was PBIS it? First off, the evidence basis for PBIS was very persuasive. It has a long history of evidentiary support in the education system. Some other systems were beginning to use it with good success in juvenile justice. And again, getting back to our code reform mandate, it was evidence-based. It also was extremely compatible with the other goals of our code reform to help convert our system into a more rehabilitative process. As Dr. Joe Levette pointed out, PBIS is data-driven and uses a continuum of supports and reinforcements to encourage and reward expected behaviors rather than punishing students when they don't do things right. And historically, juvenile justice environments have been very good at telling kids what they have done wrong. PBIS gave us a system in an organized, structured way to tell people, or excuse me, to tell kids, but staff as well, what they were doing right and to encourage them to continue to do that. And of course, that gives the kids a feeling of self-efficacy and attainment. You know, many of these young people have been told for many, many years that they were bad kids, wrong kids, not doing things properly. This gives them a sense of attainment and success that they can then build on to continued success. So, how did we go about implementing this in Georgia? Initially, this was an other duty as assigned to our programs and case management staff. We have 4 programs and case management regional administrators who are in charge of all monitoring of all case management and risk reduction service provision in our short and long-term facilities. And we told them, and by the way, you're going to oversee PBIS too. We did that for a period of time, and it pretty quickly became clear that PBIS, if done properly and with fidelity, was simply too large to be an other duty as assigned. And with that in mind, in October of 2015, we created a full-time position that was specifically dedicated to the oversight of PBIS and secure facilities. We worked with that one position, collaborating with all other disciplines for a period of time, and then it became clear that one person could not oversee PBIS in all 26 facilities by themselves. So we moved to our current staffing model. We, again, have our statewide PBIS administrator, who is responsible for overseeing a staff of 4, oversees the implementation and fidelity in each of our secure facilities, serves as a member of the Behavioral Health Leadership Team, and that's OBHS's Office of Behavioral Health Services, which is where our PBIS is housed. And Ms. Niles also serves as a liaison to our internal and external stakeholders. So we've become very connected with our State Department of Education, who has a strong PBIS presence in our community, and have partnered with them to help make our process more unified and cohesive. That's been quite successful to the end that most recently, after a statewide PBIS conference, a teacher from one of our local school systems approached Ms. Niles after a presentation and told her that when they have a returning DJJ youth enter their school, they use that DJJ youth to educate new students on how PBIS works, because our students understand it so well and buy in so well. And then Ms. Niles also conducts training as needed. She oversees a staff of 4 facility climate specialists, and the climate specialists monitor assigned facilities where they provide ongoing training and technical assistance to their assigned facilities and implementation. So they help train new staff, they help refresh existing staff, they'll do shift briefing, spot trainings, they'll work with the kids, anything to help keep that educational component fresh and current. In addition, the local operating procedure is the way each facility operationalizes its specific PBIS program. As Dr. Jolivet pointed out, PBIS is a framework, not a specific model, so every facility develops from the ground up their own motto, their own expectations, and connects all of those things together. That's all laid out in the LOP and attached teaching tools. In addition, our facility climate specialists do monthly reports for agency leadership, and every facility has a report generated every month to indicate how that facility is doing at this time. Are they in compliance with Fidelity on all 3 tiers? If not, in which tiers are they compliant? What activities have they been doing with the youth, with the staff, what trainings have happened, etc. And every quarter, we utilize the tiered fidelity inventory, which is a validated PBIS fidelity tool to do an actual fidelity review of the facility's process. And also, our facility climate specialists do serve as representatives to our internal and external stakeholders. So, that PBIS fidelity tool that I just mentioned, again, that's the tiered fidelity inventory tool, and I believe that it can be located through the resource links that were provided by Dr. Jolivet. We selected this tool because it has been validated specifically in secure juvenile justice environments, and because it provides fidelity ratings for all 3 tiers of implementation. So a facility may do very well in Tier 1 and Tier 2, but not attain fidelity in Tier 3, and that helps target resources to improve what needs improvement rather than a generalized approach of providing assistance where things might really be operating quite well and not need additional assistance. As we just mentioned, the climate specialists conduct the TFI on a quarterly basis and generate a comprehensive report that summarizes the fidelity on each tier. That report is then generated to facility staff to use in corrective actions and continual support of ongoing fidelity, and to agency leadership as an update. In the off months, the climate specialists document facility report efforts towards either achieving or maintaining fidelity on all of the tiers, and summarize any training and technical assistance support that they provided. Dr. Jolivet spoke quite a bit of the data-informed component of PBIS, and like many of you, we collect a lot of data that could be mined effectively to help support our PBIS program. We do have a proprietary automated youth record, and working with our in-house IT department, we're able to develop 2 PBIS-specific reports. Those reports were developed in central office but are available to each facility specific to their facility. The reports can be run on demand. They are in real time and they update automatically, and they are available to help the facility organize its data in such a way as to manage its PBIS process. The first of these is the PBIS radar report, and this is a youth-specific report that provides a snapshot of the current standing of each and every young person in the facility. It includes their current PBIS tier, the length of time they've been assigned to that tier, the number of specific behavioral incidents, including special incidents, disciplinary reports, school removals and exclusions, etc., that they have had that have contributed to their tier assignment. And it allows the facility to target those kids who are most likely to either need additional supports or tier increases, or those who are becoming successful and perhaps can move down to the next lower tier. The second report is the PBIS dashboard, which is a facility-wide aggregate tool. The dashboard provides an overview of the collected behavioral indicators as well as information about the day and time of day the problem behaviors occur. And I'm going to show you examples of each of these so you can have a better idea of what I mean. I am sorry, my data slides aren't there. Well, that's okay because Mr. Sovereign is going to review some very specific facility-based data for that. And anybody who would like to see an example of the reports, my contact information will be available at the end of this webinar. Please feel free to reach out and I'll be happy to share them with you. So training is an ongoing process in PBIS and is ongoing at many levels all the time. We have routine statewide trainings that are held by other agencies, usually, as I mentioned earlier, by DOE, and are attended by PBIS leadership, behavioral health leadership, often our educational staff and their leadership. So many of the DJJ staff are participating in these multi-agency PBIS collaboratives. In addition, we, through our PBIS administrative staff, conduct regular refresher trainings for agency staff and facility senior leadership. Ms. Niles also hosts quarterly trainings for our facility PBIS team leads and co-leads that gather all of the leads and co-leads out of the facilities together in a central location to receive fresh information and also share with each other strategies that they have used that have been effective. So it provides a cross-facility training opportunity as well. And of course, we have periodic training sessions with Dr. Joe Levette on new ideas, advances, developments in other states, new tools, new skills, which she trains us in, and we then push out to the facility teams by way of our quarterly trainings. Tier 2 and Tier 3 are probably the most consistently challenging pieces of the process for our staff and must be refreshed regularly. So what has PBIS accomplished for us? As Dr. Joe Levette mentioned, PBIS has had a significant positive impact on the climate and culture of our secure facilities. In addition, our commissioner, Commissioner Avery Niles, several years ago implemented a statewide initiative to reduce the use of isolation in our secure facilities. And PBIS has been a strong component of the ability to operationalize and execute the commissioner's initiative. We also see that when PBIS is implemented with Fidelity in a facility, problematic behaviors, especially incidents related to aggression, decrease, in some cases very dramatically. This makes logical sense as PBIS strengthens relationships between youth and staff, and individuals with a positive supportive relationship are far less likely to become aggressive and far more likely to use positive, proactive coping strategies to address challenges. And we talked about that. In addition, as Dr. Joe Levette said, youth engagement clearly improves when PBIS is strong. And we see this across all areas. We see engagement in treatment and other services, engagement in education, positive staff relationships, and also positive peer relationships. As youth internalize the expectations and can really talk the talk, you will hear them using PBIS language with each other and complimenting each other for accomplishing things or meeting expectations. PBIS is a very intuitive system for the young people in our facilities, and they tend to grasp very quickly how it works, how it should look, what they need to do to be successful, and they tend to retain that information. When a youth transfers in our system from one secure facility to a different secure facility, obviously there will be a different sort of operationalization at the new facility, but the underlying principles are the same, and the kids understand very quickly how to work within the new setting. Conversely, if it's not working, they will also tell you that it's not. This is actually a real strength of the PBIS system, and youth feedback and youth voice is a key component to a truly strong PBIS program. We routinely have youth focus groups at facilities explicitly to ask them what's working, what's not working, what would you like to see more of, what would you like to see less of, what suggestions do you have? And they take being asked for their feedback very seriously and have some very good things to offer. And I hand it over to Mr. Saba.
Good afternoon. Before I begin with giving a PowerPoint about some data points that we have at Milledgeville YDC, it's probably important for me to give you a little bit of background of the facility prior to our implementation of PBIS. In January 2015, the agency repurposed the facility. It's a 30-bed facility, all male, as an intensive treatment unit for students who couldn't be managed behaviorally at other YDC facilities throughout the state. In February 2017, that all changed. The mission changed itself, which then allowed us to become part of the PBIS program. Being the on-site educational supervisor or principal, I also became the chairperson for PBIS. We've seen some major statistical gains with our youth. It's important to understand that the individuals that we serve usually cannot be managed in other facilities. We look at 5 target areas for our youth: self-harm, youth-on-youth assaults, youth-on-staff assaults, medication noncompliance, and the number of physical intervention techniques or use of force that is used on a monthly basis. We look at other areas too, but those are our 5 main tenets for data. To begin the program, we had to come up with our behavioral matrix, which came about by sitting down with members of all disciplines within the facility and discussing the types of behaviors that we wanted the students to engage in positively. So based on that, we came up with our acronym of SOAR, S-O-A-R, and our mascot is an eagle for showing respect, observing safety, accepting responsibility, and resolving conflict. With our behavioral matrix, that's worked well because a lot of the students that we received at the time, they just didn't demonstrate any of these positive behaviors. So we wanted to focus on a lot of, the basics with these individuals. Looking at the our first slide, we have our self-harm behaviors. Now the data that I'll be showing you is from March of 2017 to February 2018. I actually just received the March numbers today, so I can share those with you also. As you see, there's some initial declines that are pretty significant, but then periodically, like in June and September, they increase. The great thing about PBIS and the interdisciplinary treatment team and mental health treatment team is that we can look at our data and identify specific areas and even using the dashboard locations and time of problem areas. Looking at June, for example, and in September, we know that we had an increase in self-harm behaviors because we received many new students to the program, which in our facility, we're pretty heavily gang-laden, so it sets off the numbers. So we usually see on certain days, particularly in months where we receive a lot of new admissions to our facility, we see spikes in some of these behaviors, and then over time they pretty much normalize. Now this shows in February the self-harm behaviors rate at about 27. As of today, our self-harm behaviors for March would be 25. Now, our youth-on-youth assaults initially declined, was flat for a while, and then increased. Once again, in June, it increased based on the number of students that we received from other facilities. The data shows what it shows oftentimes. There's no rhyme or reason of why certain indicators go up and some go down. Although we're able to establish, give reasoning to some of it. Overall, though, I can say for youth-on-youth assaults, from a 3-year period from the initial program being implemented to this year, we have had a reduction of youth-on-youth assaults, a 33% reduction. And self-harm, we've had a negative 27% reduction. Youth-on-staff assaults, which tends to be one of the biggest ones that we look at, particularly administrative staff and also the line correctional officer, JCO, also shows some interesting data. We've had some major declines, but we've had some major issues and some increases. And like I said before, a lot of this has to do with the increase has to do with individuals being gang affiliated, being admitted to the facility, and usually coming in contact with individuals from gangs from other facilities that they were with before. Our youth on staff over the 3-year period, even though it shows some pretty significant up and down, has decreased 80% in the last 3 years, which is pretty significant. Psychotropic medication non-compliance from March to February, pretty interesting numbers. We've had a 71% reduction over the 3-year period. For March of this year, our number is actually 6. So as you can tell, that goes up and down. PBIS is a main driver for a lot of our decreases. With our physical intervention techniques, we've had a steady decline over a long period of time. Overall, over a 3-year period, we've had a negative 67% decline with physical intervention techniques with youth. For March of this year, our number is 14, which is from year to year a 44% decrease. Some other things that I wanted to discuss in regards to PBIS. From a facility-wide standpoint, PBIS has worked extremely well, especially in the educational setting. At Milledgeville YDC, or Youth Development Center, we use a blended educational model utilizing Odyssey Ware credit recovery program and also direct instruction. In 12 months, tracking the 45 kids that we've had, they've been able to acquire 168.5 credits. 7 or more of those students were able to earn 10 or more credits in less than a year. So it's been a very positive aspect as far as education. In that time period, or over the last 3 years, we've actually had 7 graduates. 4 of them were actually our GED graduates, and 3 of them being high school. 2 out of 3 of those high school students were special education students. So it's worked out very well. Some of the issues to implementation of PBIS, I know that Dr. Jolivet and Dr. Doyle would probably like for me to discuss this. It's not necessarily a difficult program. The biggest challenge that any facility or any area might have is implementation, and particularly staff buy-in. Getting staff on board and particularly getting training has always been a challenge for us. And it's an ongoing challenge that we deal with monthly. But slowly you find over a period of time, staff will get on board because the culture will change. And as you know, it takes a while, particularly in this agency or in this field, for a culture to change from one month to the next. In some cases, it takes years. And that pretty much concludes.
Well, Danny, thank you very much. Christine and Christy, this is Simon Gonsolin. I'm the project director of the National Technical Assistance Center for the Education of Children and Youth who are neglected or delinquent. Thanks so much for wonderful bits of information you shared with the group and the wonderful resources you shared as well, Christine. So I do have a few questions that have come in. Christine mentioned, Danny, maybe this is a question for you. Christine mentioned it was necessary to saturate the facility environment with behavioral or engagement expectations. Is that mainly meant for staff, for youth, or both? And what would this look like, Danny, in your facility?
I'm sorry, it was hard for me to hear. Can you repeat that?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So when Christine was talking a little earlier, she mentioned that it was necessary to saturate the facility environment with behavioral or engagement expectations. Is that meant for staff? Is that meant for students? Is it meant for both staff and youth? What would that look like in your facility?
Actually, it's meant for both because the behavioral expectations are really for the students, but it's important that the staff are aware of them so that they can positively reinforce the students when those students demonstrate that behavior. How it looks at our facility is we just do a lot of advertising. We have our behavioral matrix, like I mentioned before, was SOAR. Our mascot is the eagle that kind of goes along with that. So it ties in like any other school mascot would. We have signs that are posted. We have activities. At our facility, we do 3 activities a week based on PBIS. And as students earn, some people may say points, but we actually use talent tickets, like an Eagles talent. And when an individual actually demonstrates one of the behaviors on the matrix, he earns that. And over a period of time, those accumulate, and he could utilize those talent tickets to earn his way into one of the activities. But pretty much the whole idea of PBIS is posted throughout the facility. Additionally, we reinforce that in the classroom by talking about PBIS, demonstrating what some of these behaviors may look like in certain settings.
Okay. And I meant to mention if Christy or Christine wants to add to that, you're welcome to do so.
Thanks, Simone. Yes, this is Christy, and I would like to add some extra things to Danny's really excellent explanation. When he was talking about the reinforcement tokens, which for Milledgeville are the talent tickets, it is important to help the kids develop that sense of ownership. So they earn their talent tickets or their reinforcement tokens through their exhibiting the behavioral expectations, and then can spend those, if you will, on things that are reinforcing to them. Those can be PBIS events. There are also opportunities for more individualized things. For example, many of our long-term facilities are located in rural areas of the state, while a lot of our long-term youth come from our urban areas. So a young person may choose to use some of their tokens to purchase an additional phone call home, or in some cases where we have the tech capability to purchase a brief video conference under supervision with a family member. So that's one of the beautiful things about PBIS is that it is so flexible to help find what motivates each individual youth as well as to help motivate kids as a group.
Thanks, Christy. There are a couple of more questions. One of the outcomes of facility-wide PBIS has been improved relationships between staff and youth. That was one of the things that y'all promoted in the presentation. Can you specifically describe these improved relationships? What do they look like?
This is Christine. So what we're hearing staff and agencies report is that when there is conflict or a youth has misstepped or engaged in a problem behavior at any point during their time in the facility, that the staff and through facility-wide PBIS have actually built a problem-solving language. So when a youth missteps, they use the facility-wide behavioral expectations. So in Danny's facility, they would talk about, showing respect, and so forth, whatever expectation they were not displaying, and what they could do differently. Those relationships, it also means that youth are taking ownership of their behavior, like Christy was mentioning, where let's say they refuse to do some work in the classroom. They'll be able to come back and say, you know what, I kind of blew it. I wasn't showing respect. I didn't like what that person had to say, and so I called you a word and sat here and disrupted the class. I could do better next time. It allows that opportunity for the staff to teach youth that, yes, we all make mistakes, but we can reset and turn it around in a more positive way. We've also seen youth come and ask for assistance from staff when they see their behaviors heading in a direction that they do not like themselves, because staff, again, are using the framework as a way to address behaviors. And one thing to mention in that fictitious example I shared, de-escalation strategies were part of Tier 1, and that some of our agencies have actually embedded de-escalation strategies within their facility-wide PBIS plans. So again, that we're taking a problem-solving language context with youth instead of an accusatory and punishing one.
Thanks, Christine. We do have a few more questions. One of the questions is, what did the acronym SOAR stand for? SOAR?
Oh, okay. The acronym, our behavioral matrix acronym is SOAR. The S is show respect, O is observe safety, A is accept responsibility, and R is resolve conflict.
And is that sort of the basis of the PBIS framework and expectations for the youth? Is that correct?
Yes, and basically how it works is those are basic behavioral matrix that we want to see in each area. So our overall behavioral matrix is a large grid, and basically we have it listed out. What does showing respect look like in education? What does showing respect look like on the unit? What does it look like in medical? What does it look like in treatment? And we actually give examples of those types of behaviors so students they can become familiar with those. And that's for all 4 areas across the entire spectrum for each program. It even involves recreation, dinner time. Every aspect of programming has, they devised their own behavior matrix. Yes, I could say that. Under showing respect, observing safety, and accepting responsibility and resolving conflict, because it looks different in other areas.
Thanks, Danny. That sort of combination question. How are talent tickets different from the typical point system? And do you take tickets away, or can youth lose these, or in other words, can these youth lose these tickets of bad behavior?
Well, I've been in DJJ for quite a few years, and I've seen a lot of behavioral management programs. And I can tell you, with the philosophy of PBIS, students actually earn them, and staff, what they actually do on site is if they observe a behavior, let's say a student shows respect in education, the teacher will write a talent ticket, put it in a drop box, and we have those strategically located throughout the facility. The students never actually handle them, and we do that for fidelity reasons. But one of the biggest aspects of PBIS is we let the student know, hey, you've earned a talent ticket for showing respect by doing whatever the behavior was, by positively reinforcing that. Usually at the end of the day, we tally all those up and we put out. What I like about the system and how it works well for us is there's a component in a life skills that we use in education with their talent tickets. We think of it like them earning a paycheck or earning money. They earn so much money and they're able to utilize it. They don't ever lose talent tickets, or what most people would call points. They only lose them as they utilize them to purchase activities or additional phone calls. So there is a possibility that a student at the time's behavior may not be, he may not be doing well, and he might be in quite a bit of trouble, but his bank account, as the kids call it, still remains the same. So anything that he has to utilize out of his account. And we post that daily and also weekly. So students will actually know how many talent tickets that they have to spend, how many they may have to earn for next week. So that in a way they kind of budget it just like money, or in a financial class in school.
Okay, thanks. We have another question. You share that the PBIS data is critically important, and as you share that data or those outcomes, based on the framework, implementation to staff and the DJJ leadership, what has been their reaction? You talked a little bit about how 5 or 6 particular areas have really dropped over the years, some as high as 80% reduction in these negative behaviors. What has been their reaction in sharing the data, and how often do you share the PBIS data across the facility?
I guess this is for me again. We share it monthly. We're required to have a monthly PBIS meeting where the data that I just shared with everybody, I share with the administrators, or actually it's not necessarily even administrators, it's just a team. It's representatives. We have at least one, sometimes even 2 from each area: mental health, counseling, security, education, and the administrative area. Excuse me. So we meet every month. We look at the data. We figure out where we're having a good month and where we're having a bad month. And I guess the whole idea of PBIS is, what do you do with that data once you've reviewed it? And that's probably the most important part. With the data dashboard that Dr. Doyle and Dr. Jolivet spoke about, we can break data down to time of day and location. So we might be able to find hot spots throughout the facility where at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, this is where most of the fights are occurring on the rec field, or usually before school. Luckily for us at our facility, we have very few behavioral problems in the academic setting. And we attribute that to PBIS. Okay,
very good. So how are staff recognized for their mastery of the PBIS objectives, processes, and interactions with youth? I mean, it's a gradual process. It sounds like it's something that doesn't happen overnight. But as staff become more proficient, how is that recognized? Christy, do you think you might be able to help us with that?
Sure. So we're seeing staff recognition for PBIS implementation vary across agencies, and that usually has to do with resources as well as contraband and policies and procedures. But what's common across every facility that's implementing this is that there is an expectation, because staff are taught and modeled how to implement facility-wide PBIS, the plan that's created by their interdisciplinary peers, and so they're reinforced. They do it just like with the youth, in terms of it's immediate, it's verbal. Thank you for engaging in SOAR today. That was a difficult situation with Danny, but you really showed respect in that situation and used the language as intended. Thank you. In addition, some of the facilities, I'll use Danny's as an example. So if they're giving out a Talon ticket, it might also be on that Talon ticket the staff who actually is giving that reinforcer to the youth. And so in some of our facilities, they pull those out as a raffle, and they do a percentage, let's say 10% of staff numbers. They pull once a week or every couple weeks, and they, instead of reading the name of the youth, they read the name of the staff, and they recognize the staff publicly with the other staff for engaging in the program. We've seen things where staff are allowed to dress down within policy, have the best parking space. We've had directors and other administrators at the facility level give up their prime parking space, and that is a PBIS leader for the week or the month. We've seen facilities reach out to their community partners, just like they would for donations for youth and activities, for gift cards and things like that for staff. We've also seen some facilities use group contingencies to get staff on board so that they know what the expectations are, they can say it, they can model it, and so forth, where then staff as a collective might earn something. In one facility, they earned a water cooler in the break room. So it really goes, it just depends on the facility, what they're allowed to do, and then our teams are very creative in making sure staff are recognized.
Very good. Thanks for that explanation. I think time for just one more question. Do staff feel as though the implementation of PBIS is sort of babying or coddling the youth or bribing them for good behavior? If a statement was made to you as a trainer or an individual who is sold on PBIS, how would you reply to that sort of statement?
Simone, this is Christy, and it's funny that you should ask because I do get that question quite regularly, and I suspect that Dr. Jolivet does as well. The cognitive shift in juvenile justice has caused some folks to not quite understand that PBIS is actually helping kids skill build to function in the same way they would function in society. And Danny made a really good point about calling the talent tickets how the kids earn their pay, if you will. You know, very much in the same way that any of us shows up at our place of employment and does our job to earn our salary, the job that our kids have while they are in our facilities is to acquire new skills and acquire new ways of thinking about the world and interacting with the world that equips them to be functioning, productive members of society when they reenter. So far from being a babying of the youth, it's actually teaching them how to function within the parameters and structures that all of us function within in society, and ultimately hopefully preparing them to be successful when they leave us.
Thanks, Christy. I appreciate that. Well, we'll have to just kind of cut off the question here. We're a little over time, as a matter of fact. I'll turn things back over to Peter, who tell you a little bit about the feedback form and also the next webinar in our series. Peter, it's all yours.
Thank you, Simone. I just want to thank our presenters, Dan, Christine, and Christy. Thank you very much for sharing. It was really helpful, and I think the idea of having a strategy that goes from the classroom into the living space is really, really helpful. We are looking for feedback on these webinars. It would be really helpful if you take the time to plug into the link and give us some feedback on the last slide, I believe. Jonah, is there another slide that has the link for that?
Hi, Peter. It'll pop up right as the webinar ends. So before you exit out, you'll see that survey. Okay. So if folks could do that, we would really appreciate that feedback. And our next webinar session is going to be Monday, May 7th. And it's going to be Frank Martin and a gentleman named Michael Kahn from the Oregon Youth Authority. Frank is the retired Director of Education in Oregon, and Michael is currently a principal in one of the facilities, and their focus is going to be on technology, the use of technology by young people in the juvenile justice context. So I'm excited about that. I've seen Frank present before, and I think it's going to be an excellent session next month. So thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.